For nearly 1,000 years, the architectural secrets of Rome remained a locked vault. We are about to uncover the true story of how ancient engineering was resurrected during the Italian Renaissance, a revival that reshaped civilization itself. By the end of this journey, you will understand how lost ideas can be found and used to build an entirely new world. We will explore how monks preserved fragile knowledge in isolated monasteries, and how one brilliant architect solved a puzzle that had baffled generations. How does a society recover the genius of a past age, and what does it take to build upon it? The grand structures of Rome did not vanish in a single, dramatic collapse. Instead, the knowledge to build them faded away over centuries, like a light slowly dimming. Following the empire's political fragmentation, the intricate systems of engineering that had defined its power began to decay from a lack of maintenance and understanding. Aqueducts that once channeled millions of gallons of fresh water into cities cracked and fell silent. The precise volcanic ash-based recipe for Roman concrete, a material that could harden underwater and endure for millennia, was simply lost to memory. The master builders who understood the physics of the arch, the vault, and the monumental dome were gone, their techniques no longer taught. The world did not just forget how to build on a Roman scale. It forgot that such a scale was even possible for ordinary humans to achieve. The magnificent ruins that dotted the landscape became objects of superstition and awe. People looked upon the Colosseum or the Pantheon and could not believe their ancestors had created them. They seemed like the work of a forgotten race of giants or of magicians whose arts were lost to the world. This cultural amnesia created a profound silence, a gap in human capability that would last for nearly 1,000 years. Yet this silence also set the stage for an incredible rediscovery. The first clues to breaking it would not be found in quarries or at construction sites, but hidden quietly within the pages of ancient books, preserved by a dedicated few through the long centuries of forgetting. In the quiet solitude of monastic scriptoria, the great works of Rome were given a second life, not in stone and mortar, but in ink and parchment. Monks, laboring by candlelight for the glory of God, became the unsung guardians of a secular legacy. Their primary mission was to copy sacred texts, yet they also preserved the secular knowledge of the ancients, meticulously transcribing every manuscript they could acquire. Among these treasures was the work of a Roman architect and engineer named Vitruvius. His 10-volume masterpiece, De Architectura, was a comprehensive guide to Roman building techniques, covering everything from city planning and aqueducts to the precise proportions of temples. For centuries, this encyclopedia of engineering was copied and stored, its complex diagrams and Latin prose understood by only a handful of scholars. The practical knowledge of how to build a massive dome or a stable arch was dormant, a set of instructions waiting for a reader who could not only understand the words but also visualize their physical form. These monasteries were far more than religious retreats. They were the libraries of their age, acting as secure time capsules that protected fragile knowledge through centuries of upheaval. The monks themselves may not have been building colossal amphitheaters, but their patient, dedicated work ensured the seeds of Roman engineering survived a long winter. They kept the theoretical foundations intact, preserving the very language of classical construction until a new generation was ready to learn how to speak it once more. This quiet, continuous act of preservation set the stage for a cultural shift that would eventually reach beyond the monastery walls, igniting a revolution in how people saw their own potential and their past. The quiet preservation of knowledge within monasteries needed a new kind of spark to ignite a revolution. That spark came from a profound shift in thought, a movement that began not with bricks and mortar, but with ink and a powerful new idea. Francesco Petrarca, known to us as Petrarch, looked upon the same crumbling Roman ruins that inspired awe and superstition in others, and he saw something different entirely. He saw the work of brilliant human beings. This perspective was the heart of humanism, an intellectual movement that urged a return to the sources, a direct engagement with classical texts in their original Latin and Greek, free from the layers of medieval commentary that had obscured them. For the humanists, the ancient world was not a lost age of magic or giants. It was a golden era of human achievement, a period where human potential in art, literature, and science had reached its peak. Petrarch himself became a manuscript hunter, traveling across Europe, searching monastery libraries for forgotten works by Cicero and Livy. His passionate quest set a powerful example, creating a cultural frenzy for rediscovering the classical past. This was far more than an academic hobby. It was a complete change in worldview, when society began to see the Romans not as mythical figures but as exemplary people. Their engineering feats transformed from impossible legends into a blueprint for the present. The complex diagrams in Vitruvius's ancient architectural treatise were no longer just curious artifacts. They became vital, practical guides for a civilization that now believed it could, and should, build its own legacy upon the foundations of Rome. This cultural demand turned abstract knowledge into a tangible goal, setting the stage for the architects and artists who would finally put these recovered secrets to the test. The hunt for these classical treasures demanded more than scholarly passion. It required the skills of a detective, and in the early 15th century, the most relentless of these intellectual detectives was a man named Poggio Bracciolini. Poggio was a humanist with an insatiable appetite for rediscovery, traveling on horseback to the most remote and often neglected monastic libraries across Europe. His mission was simple yet monumental. He would sift through dusty, forgotten archives, searching for the distinctive handwriting of classical scribes, hoping to find a text that the world had presumed lost forever. In the year 1416, his persistence paid off in an extraordinary way. Within the silent walls of a German monastery, he uncovered a complete copy of a philosophical poem by Lucretius titled De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. This was a seismic find, a work that would radically influence Renaissance thought, but it was just one of many. Poggio's satchels also filled with crucial, lesser-known texts on architecture, engineering, rhetoric, and science. Each manuscript he pulled from the shelves was another vital piece of a giant puzzle. Imagine a vast intellectual jigsaw with a complete picture of Roman knowledge shattered and scattered. Poggio and his fellow humanists were the ones patiently finding and fitting the pieces back together. These recovered documents were not merely old books. They were the raw material for a revolution, containing the detailed theories, the precise diagrams, and the foundational principles that had been absent for a millennium. They provided the literal blueprints that Renaissance thinkers could now analyze, translate, and most critically begin to implement. The abstract knowledge preserved by monks was finally in the hands of people who were desperate to turn it into a tangible, breathtaking reality, setting the stage for the first great architectural test of the Renaissance. Of all the manuscripts pulled from dusty monastery shelves, one stood apart as a true architectural Bible. Marcus Vitruvius Pollio's De Architectura was the single most important architectural work to survive from classical antiquity in its entirety. Penned in the 1st century before Christ, this 10-volume treatise was nothing less than a masterclass in Roman engineering. Its pages contained exhaustive instructions on city planning, the selection of materials, and the complex mechanics of building aqueducts, cranes, and even defensive siege engines. For the first time in centuries, architects had a direct line to the Roman master builders. When humanists like Poggio made copies of this vital text and began circulating them, it ignited a firestorm of intellectual excitement. De Architectura became the essential textbook, the foundational document for a new age of building. Yet, reading this textbook was only half the battle. The text was written in dense, technical Latin, and its descriptions were often frustratingly abstract. The original diagrams, if they ever existed, had been lost to time, leaving Renaissance minds to puzzle over complex geometric forms and mechanical devices using only words as their guide. This challenge, however, proved to be a blessing in disguise. The very act of interpreting Vitruvius forced architects to become deep scholars. They had to engage with every sentence, debate its meaning, and ultimately visualize the physical reality the words described. This intense study led to brilliant innovations as they applied recovered principles to new challenges. Yet it also led to creative misinterpretations, as architects sometimes filled the gaps in their understanding with their own genius, blending ancient theory with contemporary practice in ways Vitruvius himself could never have anticipated. The book was a key, but it was a key that required immense skill to turn in the lock. For Filippo Brunelleschi, the abstract theories of Vitruvius were not enough. He needed to understand the physical truth of Roman construction, to feel the weight of its stones and comprehend the geometry of its stability. The great puzzle of his age was the unfinished dome of the Florence Cathedral, a colossal hole in the city's skyline that had baffled builders for decades. The challenge seemed insurmountable. How could a dome be raised over such a wide space without the traditional forest of wooden centering, an amount of timber that would have consumed entire forests? Driven by this frustration and a singular vision, Brunelleschi made a fateful decision. He traveled to Rome with his friend, the sculptor Donatello. This was not a leisurely pilgrimage. It was a systematic, hands-on investigation. While others looked upon the ruins with simple awe, Brunelleschi saw them as a vast, open-air laboratory. He and Donatello became the first true archaeologists of Roman engineering, spending their days measuring the precise dimensions of fallen columns, sketching the curves of broken arches, and calculating the angles of vaults. They lived among the ruins, their work fueled by a relentless curiosity. The grand prize of their study was the Pantheon, the ancient temple crowned by the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. Brunelleschi did not just admire its vast interior, he reverse-engineered it. He studied the unique pattern of its coffered ceiling, which served to remove excess weight without sacrificing strength. He analyzed the composition of the concrete and the way the thick walls at the base tapered gently as they rose, distributing the immense load downward. Most importantly, he grasped the Romans' use of a stepped dome, a structure that was essentially self-supporting as it was built. This empirical research in Rome provided the crucial missing link. Brunelleschi now possessed more than just ancient text. He had a physical, tactile understanding of Roman principles. He returned to Florence not just with sketches, but with a revolutionary confidence, armed with the practical secrets needed to solve a problem that had paralyzed his city for generations. The theoretical blueprint had finally found its master builder. Back in Florence, the colossal hole in the cathedral's roof was more than an architectural problem. It was a civic embarrassment, a challenge that had defeated every master builder for decades. The city fathers demanded a solution for the enormous octagonal space, one that would not require a forest of wooden scaffolding, a prohibitively expensive and impractical approach. Into this high-stakes dilemma stepped Filippo Brunelleschi, armed with the secrets he had unearthed in Rome. His proposal was as bold as it was unorthodox. He would build the dome without any permanent centering, a plan that many dismissed as pure madness. But Brunelleschi was not working from a blank slate. He was working from a recovered Roman playbook, which he then adapted with stunning creativity. His first masterstroke was the double shell design. Inspired by the Pantheon, he created two distinct, thinner shells, one nested inside the other. This ingenious move drastically reduced the overall weight of the dome while simultaneously increasing its structural rigidity. The space between the shells created passageways for workers and even served as a built-in cooling system, a bonus feature of his brilliant design. Then came the bricklaying. To ensure the growing curve of the dome would support itself, Brunelleschi revived a forgotten Roman technique, the herringbone pattern. He laid the bricks in a series of inverted V shapes, much like the spines of a fish. This pattern channeled the immense gravitational forces inward and downward, locking each course of bricks into the one below it. As the dome spiraled upward, it became its own support, a self-buttressing marvel of masonry. But how would he lift the thousands of tons of stone and mortar hundreds of feet into the air? The answer came from another ancient source. Studying the cranes described by Vitruvius, Brunelleschi designed and built a revolutionary hoisting machine. His device, powered by oxen and featuring an ingenious 3-speed gearbox and a reverse mechanism, could lift loads with a power and efficiency never before seen in his time. This machine was not in the ancient texts. It was his own improvement, a Renaissance innovation built upon a classical foundation. The dome of Santa Maria del Fiore was therefore far more than a copy of a Roman building. It was a living dialogue with the past. Brunelleschi had absorbed the principles of antiquity and then, understanding them completely, used them to engineer a solution that the Romans themselves had never attempted. He proved that the true power of rediscovered knowledge is not in simple imitation, but in the creative confidence to build something entirely new. Brunelleschi's dome did not just crown a cathedral. It shattered a centuries-old ceiling of possibility, and the echoes of that breakthrough rippled across Italy with astonishing speed. A new generation of thinkers, equally fluent in the language of Latin texts and the logic of load-bearing walls, rose to reinterpret the classical past. Among them, Leon Battista Alberti stood as the ultimate Renaissance man. A humanist scholar, artist, and architect, Alberti looked at the rediscovered work of Vitruvius and saw not a final authority, but a starting point. He penned his own architectural treatise, De Architectura, a work so comprehensive and forward-looking that it was deliberately crafted to be the new Vitruvius for a modern world. Where the ancient text was often cryptic, Alberti's was systematic and clear, translating the principles of proportion, symmetry, and geometry into a practical philosophy for contemporary builders. You can see this philosophy made stone at the Tempio Malestiano in Rimini. Alberti wrapped the existing medieval church in a magnificent classical shell, encasing it with grand arches and pilasters drawn directly from Roman triumphal architecture. He was not merely decorating a building, he was giving physical form to a humanist ideal, using the recovered language of antiquity to express a new kind of civic and spiritual grandeur. This new architectural vocabulary spread rapidly, carried by both brilliant designs and ambitious writings. In Milan, the architect and sculptor known as Filarete produced his own treatise, a sometimes fanciful but deeply influential book that championed the classical style with evangelistic zeal. His designs and those of his contemporaries may have varied in their strict adherence to ancient rules, but they all shared a common foundation. The arch, the vault, and the dome were no longer mysterious relics. They were now understood tools, their engineering principles systematically studied and refined. What had been the exclusive, almost magical domain of Roman engineers became a teachable, repeatable science. From the crowded streets of Florence to the powerful courts of Milan and the maritime Republic of Venice, the skyline began to transform. Cityscapes once dominated by the vertical lines of Gothic spires now welcomed the harmonious curves of domes and the strong, horizontal lines of classical cornices. This was more than a change in fashion. It was a fundamental shift in how people conceived their world, building a new architectural reality that was unshakably rooted in the past yet gazed confidently toward the future. The soaring ambition of Renaissance architecture demanded more than just rediscovered designs. It required a deeper understanding of the very substances that gave Roman buildings their legendary strength, materials that had themselves become a mystery. The Romans had possessed a kind of magic in their mortar, a volcanic ash known as pozzolana that, when mixed with lime and water, created a concrete of almost supernatural durability. This was the secret behind harbor walls that hardened in the sea and aqueducts that endured for 1,000 years. But that specific alchemical knowledge had faded with the empire, leaving Renaissance builders to rely on the familiar virtues of stone, brick, and a simpler, weaker lime mortar. A crucial piece of the engineering puzzle was still missing, yet as architects like Alberti pored over Vitruvius, they found entire chapters dedicated to the composition and sourcing of materials. The text described the different types of lime, the best sands for mixing, and the remarkable properties of pozzolana ash. It was a detailed material science textbook, and it rekindled a powerful curiosity. If they could not find the exact volcanic ingredients Vitruvius described, they could at least begin to ask the same questions he had. How could they make their mortar stronger? What made one type of stone more resilient than another? This shift in focus, from simply copying forms to investigating the chemistry of construction, marked a quiet but profound revolution. The quest to imitate Roman concrete, even imperfectly, led to tangible improvements. Builders began experimenting with new recipes for mortar, adding crushed brick or terracotta to create a stronger, more hydraulic mix that could better resist moisture. Brickmaking itself became more scientific, with a new emphasis on consistent quality, precise firing, and standardized sizes. And to achieve the smooth, monolithic appearance of Roman walls, they developed sophisticated new types of stucco and plaster, carefully layered and polished to mimic the seamless stone surfaces of antiquity. While they never perfectly recaptured the Roman concrete formula, their investigative spirit pushed the boundaries of their own technology. Each experiment, each improved batch of mortar, each more durable brick was a small victory in material science. This incremental progress expanded the very possibilities of construction, allowing for structures that were not only beautiful but also built to last, proving that the rediscovery of ancient engineering was as much about the chemistry in the mortar as it was about the geometry of the arch. But the ambitions of the Renaissance were not confined to the sky. They also flowed underground through the very veins of the city. The Romans had been unparalleled masters of water, building aqueducts that crossed vast distances and sewers that cleansed entire metropolises. As Italian city-states swelled in population and wealth, their need for clean water and better sanitation became a crisis demanding an ancient solution. Engineers and patrons began to look with fresh eyes at the broken arches of Roman aqueducts snaking across the countryside. They were no longer just picturesque ruins. They were a challenge and a blueprint. In Rome itself, the popes launched ambitious campaigns of restoration. One of the most significant was the revival of the Aqua Virgin, an ancient aqueduct that had been shattered for centuries. The project was a monumental feat of archaeological engineering, requiring workers to clear blocked tunnels, repair collapsed sections, and trace the original route. Its success was a triumph. To this day, the Aqua Virgin delivers the water that cascades so spectacularly into the Trevi fountain, a vivid symbol of how Renaissance engineering literally rebuilt the lifeblood of the ancient world. This was not mere imitation. It was a profound act of reconnection, channeling a Roman achievement directly into the heart of a modern city. The principles of gravity-fed water systems, of graded channels and durable hydraulic mortar, were pulled from the pages of history and made to serve a living, thirsty populace once more. The knowledge of how to move water on this scale had returned, and with it came the power to reshape the urban environment in ways not seen for 1,000 years. No one embodied this fusion of ancient study and futuristic vision more completely than Leonardo da Vinci. He pored over the writings of Roman water commissioners like Frontinus, and he spent countless hours examining the ruins of Roman harbors and drainage systems. His notebooks exploded with designs that were deeply rooted in classical principles yet soared into the realm of genius. He sketched plans for canalizing unruly rivers, designed sophisticated lock systems to make waterways navigable, and even conceived of schemes for underwater diving suits and dredging machines to maintain ports. Leonardo understood that Roman hydraulic mastery was about control, and he sought to regain that control with tools the Romans could never have imagined. This reemergence of water management transformed Renaissance life. Cleaner water meant improved public health, reducing the scourge of waterborne diseases. Reliable aqueducts powered new industries, from paper mills to textile factories, and the abundant flow enabled the creation of those spectacular fountains that became the glittering centerpieces of piazzas, dazzling displays of a city's wealth, power, and technological prowess. To command water was to command civilization itself, and the Renaissance had once again learned that lesson from Rome. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks are a whirlwind of genius, a place where ancient secrets did not merely rest but sprang to life with explosive new possibilities. He was the ultimate universal man, an artist who saw no boundary between the beauty of a painting and the precision of a gear. In his personal library sat a well-studied copy of Vitruvius, that foundational text of Roman engineering, yet Leonardo treated it not as a final word, but as a conversation starter. His thousands of pages of sketches reveal a mind tirelessly re-engineering the classical world. He drew massive catapults and treadwheel cranes that were direct descendants of Roman machines, but he did not stop at copying them. He analyzed their physics, searching for ways to reduce friction, increase power, and maximize efficiency. A Roman siege engine was a starting point. Leonardo's design for a rapid-firing cannon or a more stable mortar was the evolutionary leap. This was the core of his method. He absorbed the recovered knowledge of the ancients and then asked the next logical question. How can this be better? His famous flying machines, with their intricate wings and control mechanisms, were born from this same relentless curiosity. He studied bird anatomy with the rigor of a scientist, but the initial spark came from the ancient myth of Icarus, a story that had fascinated classical writers. Leonardo looked at that old tale of hubris and saw an engineering problem to be solved. In his work, the Renaissance spirit reached its fullest expression. Reverence for the past did not mean living in it. Instead, classical wisdom became the launchpad for an imagination that knew no limits, perfectly blending art, science, and engineering into a single, seamless discipline dedicated to understanding and improving the world. Yet for all his genius, Leonardo's ideas remained trapped in his private notebooks. The true power of rediscovered knowledge lies not just in its discovery, but in its distribution. A new technology was about to shatter the old, slow economy of information, turning a scholarly trickle into a continental flood. That technology was the printing press. Around the year 1450, Johannes Gutenberg's invention began to spread across Europe, and it arrived at the perfect moment to ignite the architectural revolution. Before the press, a precious manuscript like Vitruvius De Architectura was a singular treasure. It had to be copied by hand, a slow and expensive process that introduced errors with every new version. A single mistake in a geometric diagram or a mistranslated Latin phrase could render an entire architectural principle useless. The printing press changed everything. Now, for the first time, these crucial texts could be reproduced with perfect accuracy, page after page, copy after copy. The most important breakthrough came when printers began adding detailed woodcut illustrations. Imagine an architect in Germany or France who had never seen the Roman ruins for himself, now holding a printed edition of Vitruvius filled with clear, consistent diagrams of arches, columns, and complex machinery. Suddenly, the abstract descriptions were made visually concrete. These illustrated treatises, along with the newly printed works of humanists like Alberti, created a shared technical language that transcended local building traditions. A patron in London and a stonemason in Prague could now be looking at the exact same page, discussing the same principles of proportion and symmetry. This was the democratization of genius. The engineering secrets that had been so painstakingly recovered were no longer the exclusive property of a few elite Italian workshops. They were packaged and sent north, carried by the printed word, ready to inspire a new wave of construction that would transform the entire continent and build the modern world. The dense Latin prose of Vitruvius remained a locked door for many. Translating that text into the common tongue of the Italian streets became the next great engineering project of the Renaissance. It was no longer enough for humanist scholars to debate the text in private libraries. The real transformation would happen when the master masons and workshop artists, the hands that actually shaped the stone, could understand its principles directly. This was the birth of the translation movement, a deliberate effort to democratize architectural genius. The landmark moment arrived in 1521 with the publication of the first illustrated Italian edition of De Architectura. This book was a revelation. It was not a simple, literal translation. The scholars who produced it acted as interpreters, adding extensive commentaries and, most importantly, creating a wealth of new woodcut illustrations. Where Vitruvius had written a confusing description of a complex hoisting machine, the Italian edition now showed a clear, detailed diagram. Where he discussed the abstract geometry of proportion, the book provided visual guides. These translations were, in essence, collaborative decryptions. Scholars sat with practicing architects, debating the meaning of an obscure passage about mortar or the exact configuration of a truss. The craftsman's practical experience met the academic's linguistic skill, and together they worked to rebuild the Roman author's intent, brick by intellectual brick. This process of translation was itself a profound act of engineering. It built a sturdy bridge between the world of theoretical knowledge and the messy, practical reality of the construction site, ensuring that the secrets recovered from antiquity could finally be put to work by the people who needed them most. The same classical principles that built soaring cathedrals were soon turned to a far more urgent purpose: the grim art of war. Renaissance Italy was a fractured landscape of rival city-states, a chessboard where Florence, Milan, and Venice were locked in a perpetual struggle for power. This endless conflict created an insatiable demand for stronger defenses and more devastating weapons, and engineers once again found their answers in the Roman past. Figures like Francesco di Giorgio Martini and Giuliano da San Gallo were not just architects of palaces. They were military consultants who traveled from one city to the next, their leather satchels filled with annotated copies of Vitruvius. They pored over the sections describing Roman ballistae, massive torsion-powered catapults that could hurl stones with terrifying accuracy, and the onager, a heavy stone-throwing engine nicknamed the Wild Ass for its powerful kick. These were not treated as historical curiosities. They were blueprints for revival. Renaissance workshops began constructing these ancient machines anew, often refining their designs with improved materials and more precise geometry. The most spectacular revival was that of the movable siege tower, a multi-story wooden fortress on wheels that could be rolled against a city's walls. These were direct descendants of the Roman Helepolis, and their reappearance on the battlefield was a clear signal that the classical art of siegecraft had returned. But the world had changed since Roman times. A new and terrifying technology now dominated the battlefield: gunpowder. The thunder of cannons presented a problem the Romans had never faced. How do you defend a city against an attack that can shatter traditional, high-walled castles with a single, deafening blow? The solution, once again, was found by looking backward to move forward. Engineers studied the low, sloping, massively thick walls of Roman forts, designed to resist battering rams. They realized that the tall, thin walls of medieval castles were death traps in the age of artillery. Applying Roman principles of geometry and deflection, they invented an entirely new form of fortress, the bastion. These were angular, star-shaped projections built at the corners of a city's walls. Their slanted surfaces were designed to deflect cannonballs like a shield, while their shape allowed defenders to cover every approach with overlapping fields of fire. Walking through an Italian city like Lucca today, you can still see these magnificent geometric ramparts. They are not just piles of stone. They are a physical argument, a testament to how Renaissance minds used recovered Roman logic to solve a problem their ancestors could never have imagined. The frantic arms race between ever larger cannons and ever stronger fortifications became a vast, open-air laboratory. In this high-stakes environment, the re-adoption of ancient military technology was not a scholarly exercise. It was a matter of survival, proving that the seeds of destruction were preserved right alongside the blueprints for creation. The sheer scale of the challenge at the Vatican was enough to intimidate any engineer. A monolithic stone needle, one of the heaviest objects in the world, needed to be moved without a single crack. Pope Sixtus V had a grand vision for a new Rome, a city reborn with straight avenues and monumental centers, and this ancient Egyptian obelisk was destined to be its crowning jewel, right in the heart of St. Peter's Square. The man he entrusted with this perilous task, Domenico Fontana, understood that failure was not an option. The slightest miscalculation would mean the destruction of a priceless antiquity and a very public, very permanent disgrace. Fontana did not start from scratch. He turned to the same classical texts that had guided Brunelleschi, immersing himself in the descriptions of monumental engineering. He studied the methods Herodotus recorded for moving massive stone blocks in Egypt, and he pored over Vitruvius's detailed accounts of Roman hoisting machines and capstans. This was not just research, it was a strategic revival. He designed a colossal wooden tower to encase the obelisk, a temporary fortress of timber that would guide its descent and ascent. The real muscle came from a battery of 40 massive capstans, each one a horizontal winch turned by teams of men and horses. Hundreds of ropes, precisely threaded through an intricate pulley system, were attached to the monolith. The entire operation hinged on synchronization. Fontana imposed a military level of discipline, commanding the work with a system of bells and trumpets to coordinate every heave. A single team pulling out of sequence could snap a rope and send 300 tons of granite crashing to the ground. On the day of the lift, a hushed crowd watched as the signal sounded and the capstans began to turn. The obelisk stirred, then lifted cleanly from its base, hovering in its wooden cage before being gently lowered onto a specially built sled. It was then painstakingly dragged to its new home and raised again, a perfect vertical needle against the Roman sky. This was more than a construction project. It was a theatrical performance of recovered power. Fontana had not merely moved a stone, he had demonstrated for all of Europe to see that the lost arts of moving mountains were lost no more. The silent, stubborn weight of the ancient world had been commanded to obey once again. The same engineering genius that could move an obelisk could also make a god descend from the heavens. As Renaissance courts revived the plays of Sophocles and Plautus in their original Greek and Latin, a new demand emerged. Patrons wanted more than just actors reciting lines. They craved the full spectacle of the ancient world, complete with the magical illusions that had once stunned Roman audiences. Architects and engineers, their minds already steeped in classical texts, found the perfect instructions in the very last book of Vitruvius's architectural treatise. There, buried among the principles of aqueducts and temples, were detailed descriptions of the Roman scaeni fronds, the permanent, elaborately decorated stage backdrop, and the complex machinery that brought the stories to life. The most famous of these was the Deus ex machina, the god from the machine. This was not just a plot device, it was a real, working crane system concealed above the stage, designed to lower an actor playing a deity smoothly into the midst of the drama, resolving the plot with a touch of divine intervention. Another device, the eccyclema, was a rolling platform that could be swiftly pushed through central doors to reveal a tableau, like a murder scene inside a palace, shocking the audience with a sudden shift in perspective. Recreating these machines became a prestigious challenge for engineers working in the lavish, temporary theaters constructed for court weddings and state celebrations. They built intricate systems of counterweights, pivoting panels, and hidden winches, all designed to operate silently and seamlessly. The goal was pure, convincing illusion. A character needed to soar through the air as if by magic, or an entire forest needed to transform into a royal court in the blink of an eye. This mastery of stagecraft was more than mere entertainment. It was a public demonstration of a ruler's power and sophistication, proving that their court could command not only the hard truths of military engineering, but also the delicate art of wonder. The secrets of Roman engineering had found a new home, moving from the sacred space of the cathedral dome to the imaginative, secular world of the stage, proving that the recovered knowledge of the ancients was as much about lifting the human spirit as it was about lifting stone. The Renaissance was not an island of genius. While humanists were scouring European monasteries for Latin texts, another vital current of knowledge was flowing into Italy from the east. For centuries, the intellectual flame of ancient Greece had been kept burning brightly, not in Rome or Florence, but in the great libraries of the Islamic world and the scholarly circles of the Byzantine Empire. The works of towering Greek thinkers like Archimedes, with his laws of levers and buoyancy, and Hero of Alexandria, who designed intricate steam engines and automated puppet theaters, had never truly been lost. They had been translated into Arabic, studied, commented upon, and critically expanded by generations of Arab scholars. The Banu Musa brothers in 9th century Baghdad, for example, wrote their own book of ingenious devices, detailing sophisticated automata and trick vessels that seemed to operate by magic. When Renaissance Italy deepened its trade and diplomatic contacts with these cultures, It opened a floodgate for this preserved knowledge. Suddenly, Latin translators in places like Toledo, Spain, were not just recovering Greek texts from Arabic translations. They were gaining access to entirely new layers of scientific commentary and innovation. This was the crucial difference. It was not just about getting back the original Greek book. It was about getting it back with hundreds of years of brilliant footnotes attached. Leonardo da Vinci's fascination with perpetual motion and complex water wheels, for instance, finds clear echoes in the hydraulic engineering and automata described in these Arabic manuscripts. The reemergence of ancient engineering was therefore a grand multicultural convergence. The Latin stream from the monasteries, the Greek stream from Byzantium, and the Arabic stream of scientific advancement, all of which had been flowing separately for centuries, finally merged in the vibrant intellectual centers of Italy. This great confluence of global knowledge did not just fill in missing pages. It supercharged the entire Renaissance engine of innovation, proving that the rebirth of the ancient world was a collaborative project on a continental scale. Genius cannot build with ideas alone. It needs stone, mortar, and a seemingly endless supply of gold. The rediscovery of ancient engineering secrets would have remained a fascinating academic exercise without the powerful figures who opened their treasuries to make them a reality. This was the era of the Patron, a time when popes, princes, and wealthy merchants became the essential catalysts for the architectural revolution. They provided not just the funding, but the ambition and the competitive drive that pushed architects to attempt the impossible. Pope Nicholas V, for instance, looked at the crumbling city of Rome and saw a vision of restoration. He launched a massive campaign to repair the city's aqueducts, clear its clogged streets, and rebuild its walls, explicitly aiming to make the city worthy of its ancient past and its status as the heart of Christendom. This was not mere civic improvement. It was a theological statement in stone, using recovered Roman engineering to glorify God and demonstrate the enduring power of the Church. Later popes, like the formidable Julius II, doubled down on this vision, commissioning monumental projects like the new St. Peter's Basilica, a structure so vast it would become the ultimate symbol of papal authority. But the drive for building was not confined to the Vatican. In the bustling city-states of Florence and Milan, a new kind of power was rising. Merchant banking families like the Medici and the Sforza had amassed fortunes that rivaled those of kings. For them, patronage was a tool of statecraft and social climbing. They funded libraries to house recovered classical texts, sponsored artists to study Roman ruins, and commissioned palaces and churches that screamed of their sophistication and civic virtue. Why build a simple fortified home when you could build a graceful villa with a classical facade that whispered of your deep learning and connection to the ancient world? This created a fiercely competitive environment. A stunning dome in Florence pressured a rival family in Milan to build an even more magnificent courtyard. A beautifully engineered canal system in one city-state became a challenge for its neighbor. This rivalry was the engine of innovation. An architect like Brunelleschi or Alberti could approach a patron with a radical idea, one based on a risky interpretation of Vitruvius, and find a willing ear precisely because that patron wanted to outdo his rivals. The system of patronage transformed construction sites into high-stakes laboratories where the recovered principles of Rome were tested, refined, and spectacularly proven, all under the watchful eyes of men who believed that building magnificently was the fastest route to immortality. This dynamic dialogue with the past was never a simple act of copying. The revival of ancient engineering was a messy, creative, and deeply human process, full of brilliant guesses and inspired mistakes. Architects staring at the dense Latin of Vitruvius faced a constant challenge. The text described the three great architectural orders, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, but the original diagrams were long gone. They had to reconstruct these styles from broken column fragments and half-buried temple ruins, piecing together a complete system from scattered clues. What they created was often a Renaissance interpretation, not a Roman replica. Look at a Renaissance Doric column. Its proportions might be slightly more slender, its decorative details a bit more ornate. This was not a failure of scholarship. It was an act of creative necessity. Architects were filling in the blanks with their own sense of beauty and proportion, blending the classical ideal with the aesthetic sensibilities of their own time. Sometimes they applied principles in ways the Romans never imagined. A structural solution meant for a bridge might be used to support the ceiling of a library. A decorative motif from a tiny Roman vase could be scaled up to adorn the facade of a monumental palace. These were not errors in the traditional sense. They were innovations born from a partial understanding, a creative license that allowed the Renaissance to build upon the past rather than just replicate it. The result was something entirely new. It was a unique architectural language that used the vocabulary of Rome, but the grammar was all its own. This beautiful fusion proved that the true power of rediscovery lies not in perfect imitation, but in the creative confidence to take an ancient idea and make it speak with a contemporary voice. Beneath the soaring domes and dramatic facades lay a more grounded challenge: the chaotic, tangled streets of the medieval city. While cathedrals reached for the heavens, Renaissance rulers realized their glory also depended on the very ground their people walked upon. They looked past the monumental ruins of amphitheaters and temples to a quieter, yet equally profound Roman achievement: the science of infrastructure. The ancient Romans had been masters of connectivity, weaving their empire together with a vast network of straight, paved roads, all leading efficiently to the capital. This legacy of rational planning and durable construction held a powerful appeal for leaders trying to impose order and modernity upon their own crowded, often unsanitary territories. Though no Renaissance state could marshal the limitless slave labor or resources of the Roman Empire, its engineers eagerly adopted the underlying principles. They studied how Roman roads were built in layers, with a carefully cambered surface to shed rainwater into efficient side ditches. They marveled at the durable, tightly fitted stone paving that could withstand centuries of cart traffic and harsh weather. This was not about building highways to conquer new lands, but about bringing a new level of functionality and health to the city core. The most spectacular application of this revived logic came from Pope Sixtus V in the late 16th century. He envisioned a new Rome, a city where pilgrims could move easily between its 7 great basilicas. His ambitious plan cut through the medieval maze of alleys, creating long, straight avenues that linked the major religious sites. These were not just paths, they were powerful visual and ceremonial axes, deliberately echoing the grand processional ways of ancient Rome. Along these new streets, engineers installed functional upgrades like new aqueduct branches and public fountains, directly applying the Roman philosophy that a great city must be both magnificent and practical. This revival of urban planning, though less glamorous than a painted ceiling or a sculpted facade, was utterly fundamental. It made cities more navigable, more hygienic, and far more majestic, proving that the true reach of Roman engineering extended from the deepest sewer to the highest dome, rebuilding the very framework of civilized life. This move from blind imitation to genuine understanding marked a quiet revolution in the workshop itself. For centuries, Roman engineering functioned like a master chef's secret cookbook. The recipes worked perfectly. Mix this specific volcanic ash with lime and water to create concrete that sets underwater. Lay bricks in a herringbone pattern to create a self-supporting arch. The results were magnificent, but the fundamental reasons why these techniques worked often remained a mystery, locked within the rule of thumb. Renaissance engineers, however, were no longer satisfied with just following the recipe. They wanted to know the chemistry of the ingredients and the physics of the bake. They began to ask the dangerous question, why? Why does an arch stand? What is the precise relationship between the thickness of a wall and the height it can safely reach? This was the shift from a craft tradition to a scientific discipline. The humanist obsession with original sources now extended beyond literature to the very laws of nature. They looked at the massive dome of the Pantheon and saw not just a building to be copied, but a complex physics problem to be solved. The answers were not always in the ancient texts, because the Romans themselves did not always articulate the underlying principles. This forced Renaissance thinkers to become pioneers, using recovered Roman achievements as their primary data set for a new kind of experimental inquiry. The ultimate expression of this trend arrived with Galileo Galilei. While he stood on the shoulders of these Renaissance engineer architects, his work encapsulated their core mission. He did not just accept that a stone falls, he timed its descent and derived the mathematical law that governed it. He analyzed the strength of beams and formulated the square-cube law, explaining why a giant version of a small model will collapse under its own weight. Galileo was, in essence, doing for physics what his predecessors had done for architecture. He was moving from observation of effects to the formulation of universal, predictive principles. This was the true intellectual inheritance of the engineering revival. It was no longer enough to know that a Roman hoisting machine worked. You could now calculate its mechanical advantage. You did not need to find a lost manuscript describing a perfect mortar mix. You could experiment with different aggregates and understand the chemical reaction that caused it to harden. This transition ensured that progress could become cumulative. Future innovation was no longer a treasure hunt for forgotten scrolls, but a systematic process of building upon a firm and ever-expanding foundation of scientific knowledge. The legacy was no longer just in the buildings they left behind, but in the powerful, questioning mindset they unleashed upon the world. The architectural language of Rome soon found new voices beyond the Alps. German artist Albrecht Dürer journeyed to Italy and returned home not just with sketches, but with a scholar's obsession for Italian engineering principles. He meticulously studied their fortifications and their systems of proportion, then distilled this foreign knowledge into his own practical manuals. Dürer wrote detailed treatises on the science of measurement and the geometry of modern defensive walls, translating Italian innovations into a form that German stonemasons and military engineers could immediately understand and use. This was not a simple copy. It was an act of intellectual transmission, carrying the seeds of the Renaissance northward where they would take root in a different soil. No single event accelerated this cultural transfer more dramatically than the French King Francis I's fateful decision. A ruler with a powerful appetite for the new Italian style, he actively recruited its greatest masters to his court. His most famous import was an aging Leonardo da Vinci, who spent his final years in France, his notebooks filled with visionary engineering concepts now accessible to French patrons and builders. Under this direct Italian influence, the skyline of France began a graceful transformation. Look at the magnificent Château de Chambord, its construction overseen by Italian architects in the king's employ. Its silhouette is unmistakably French, a fantastical forest of chimneys and dormer windows that recalls the local Gothic tradition. Yet its plan reveals a profound Italianate order, a perfectly symmetrical layout organized around a central axis, and its famous double helix staircase is a masterpiece of geometric precision that could have come straight from the mind of Leonardo. The engineering revolution was proving itself adaptable. In the colder, wetter climates of Northern Europe, builders embraced the classical principles of proportion and symmetry, but they executed them with local stone and tailored them to withstand harsh winters. The reemergence of ancient engineering was never meant to create a single, uniform style across Europe. Instead, it provided a universal toolkit of ideas, a set of proven solutions that every culture could pick up and reshape for its own needs, forever altering the continent's built environment from the sun-drenched piazzas of Italy to the fortified chateaux of the Loire Valley. Even with all their brilliance, Renaissance engineers eventually hit a wall. They recovered an astonishing amount of classical knowledge, yet some of Rome's most profound secrets remained stubbornly out of reach. The most glaring example was the magical recipe for Roman concrete. Vitruvius himself laid out the basic ingredients, listing a volcanic ash called pozzolana and lime. But the true secret was not just in the ingredients, it was in the precise alchemy of their mix, the specific ratio of components, and perhaps a hidden processing technique that was never written down. Renaissance builders could make a decent mortar, but they could never replicate the supernatural durability of the Roman original. That ancient concrete, especially the version designed to harden in seawater, did not just endure the centuries. It seemed to thrive in them, actually growing stronger as modern concrete crumbles. This was a mystery that would not be solved for another 500 years, requiring modern electron microscopes to reveal a stunning process of self-healing chemistry within the Roman mix. Other losses were even more absolute. While Renaissance humanists were translating every text they could find, they had no idea that one of the ancient world's most sophisticated machines was lying at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. The Antikythera mechanism, a complex bronze gearwork device for predicting astronomical positions, was a level of precision engineering that would not be seen again until the 18th century. Its very existence was completely unknown, a secret buried by shipwreck and silt. These gaps in their recovery are not a mark of failure, they are a powerful reminder of the limits of any age. The Renaissance resurrected a magnificent library of ancient thought, but some volumes were permanently missing, their pages lost to time or waiting silently in the dark for a future generation to find them. The legacy of those recovered engineering secrets extended far beyond the cathedral and the fortress wall. This revival of ancient knowledge did more than reshape the European skyline. It fundamentally rewired the way people thought about the world itself. The process of engaging with classical texts, testing their ideas through practical application, and then daring to question and improve upon them, fostered a new and powerful mindset. It was an empirical approach, a belief that knowledge should be built on observation and hands-on experimentation. The magnificent machines designed by Renaissance engineers, from Brunelleschi's hoists to Leonardo's intricate gear systems, became more than just tools. They became the very subjects of study for the first true scientists. Trying to build a more efficient crane or a more powerful water pump forced a deeper, more systematic inquiry into the invisible laws of physics. What are the precise principles of leverage that allow a single man to lift a stone weighing tons? How does water pressure behave in a confined pipe, and how can that force be harnessed? These were no longer abstract philosophical questions. They were practical problems demanding measurable answers. This culture of building, testing, and analyzing created an intellectual bridge. It connected the artistic and engineering brilliance of the Renaissance directly to the scientific revolution of the 17th century. The work of figures like Galileo, Newton, and Boyle did not emerge from a vacuum. It was built upon a foundation of practical experience, a widespread belief that the natural world, much like a complex Roman machine, was not a realm of magic or mystery. It was a magnificent clockwork, a system of interlocking parts that could be understood, taken apart, and mastered through reason, mathematics, and relentless observation. The story of this great revival is ultimately a testament to the incredible resilience of knowledge itself. It proves that great ideas, once set in motion, possess a stubborn refusal to die. For nearly 1,000 years, the architectural genius of Rome lay dormant, a silent potential locked away in fragile manuscripts and broken stones. Its return was not a single, lucky accident, but a complex chain of human dedication. It required the quiet devotion of monks preserving texts, the relentless curiosity of humanists hunting for lost pages, the hands-on genius of architects like Brunelleschi measuring ruins, and the deep pockets of patrons who dared to fund the impossible. This was far more than a simple act of copying the past. It was a dynamic, creative, and often messy revival. Architects absorbed the principles of antiquity and then, with newfound confidence, improvised upon them, blending recovered wisdom with their own innovations to create structures like the Florence Cathedral dome, buildings that were both classically rooted and breathtakingly new. This fusion of old and new did more than just produce iconic architecture. It fundamentally rewired the European mind, fostering an empirical, questioning spirit that would ultimately propel the continent into the modern age of science and industry. The legacy of this era is a profound reminder that human progress is rarely a straight line. It is more often a conversation across the centuries, a dialogue where the wisdom of antiquity provides the foundational language for the innovations of the future. The seeds for our own world were always there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment and the right people to bring them back to life.